I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things a creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes! Good morning, Toledo, and good afternoon, Columbus, and hello to those of you listening on the internet, wherever and whenever you are. My name is Joe DeMare, and you have tuned into For a Green Future. For a Green Future is a show where we talk about ecology and the environment. We talk about them in terms of how it affects you, your family, your wealth, your health, your happiness, your pets' happiness, your friends and your families. And we try to do it with a little humor every week, and we have a great show lined up for you today. Rebecca will be joining us most likely after the break. She'll probably call in, as you can call in at any time, 866-240-1065. This is a call-in show, and we'd like to take any sort of questions or comments about your environment or ecological issues. And this is a pretty good show. We have a recorded interview with a guest, an interesting guest for us. His name is Jeff Welser, and he's with IBM, and he's going to be talking about a brand new sort of battery storage system that they have that could help revolutionize the whole transition over to clean energy. That's a nice interview coming up. That'll be about 8:15. Then we've got some eco news you could use, and I'm afraid we have some pretty shocking eco news. It could be really huge. I mean, we're kind of breaking this story here, and if it continues the way it looks like it might be, all this week you're going to start to see headlines, front page news. But right now the story is starting small, and I'll tell you all about it when we get into our eco news section. And of course we'll hear from our wonderful sponsors, and as again, hopefully we'll hear from you at 866-240-1065. So in these times of COVID, of course, I am broadcasting from my living room. Like so many other people who have to do shows, they're not going into the studios anymore. And that's why we don't have Rebecca with us today, because we just can't get the right quality from her call-in, from her setup there. So that's why she's going to be calling in later. But normally we go into the studios on Sunday morning, and I've already told you about the huge Edgar R. Murrow statue that's in the lobby next to the fountains. Well, that statue is pointing, and it points down to a room, and if you go into that room, there's a cute little museum of broadcasting there, and they have little displays with like Walter Cronkite covering the moon landing and covering 3 Mile Island, and I was thinking that there's nothing really like that today. We don't really have a trusted news source anymore. In fact, all news sources are distrusted, and with good reason. I mean, sometimes newscasts and news programs have been manipulated and have given us very false information, but we do need information to succeed, and so I like to try to do that with the show. I'm trying to give people information that's true and information that will help them. And, I can't go into the studio and get that museum experience. So I try to dress up. On Sunday mornings, I try to get a little formal here, try to get that feeling that you're about to do something great. And today I am in my nice Italian suit. This is my best suit. And one reason I'm in the Italian suit is because of the remembrance that Italy, a few years back, they had a referendum in Italy. They just put it to the people democratically, should Italy follow or pursue nuclear power? And something like 98% of Italians voted against nuclear power. And I am a huge believer in democracy. I believe that when you put questions to people like this, when you directly ask them and get them involved in their governance and in their countries, most of us are going to make the best possible decision most of the time. That's all democracy boils down to, is that if you give everybody a voice and everybody has their say and everybody presents all the facts that they know, if you present that to everybody, most of the time people are going to make the right decision, the right choice. Most of the time, most of the people. So here I am in my Italian suit, and I'm in this time of COVID. I also like to dress it up a little. I have a cute tie on that was given to me by my sons for Father's Day one year, and it's a franchise. It's a science fiction franchise that I don't have permission to use, but I'll just say that if you're looking for droids, they're on my tie. So here I am, all dressed up and ready to go. I have to start the show out with a personal story that is actually news. As you know, if you're a regular listener to this show, I love my Chrysler Pacifica plug-in hybrid van. I'm constantly talking about it. Rebecca always teases me about how much I love this van. And it's a great van. Right now I'm up around 80 miles per gallon because I'm able to recharge my van going and coming. I haven't bought gas in, I guess we're going on week 7 now. It's been 7 weeks since I've had to pull into a gas station. Unfortunately, there's some bad news about the Chrysler Pacifica hybrid. You cannot buy one right now because there is a recall on them. And the recall is because out of the 27,000 or so that have been sold so far of these Chrysler Pacifica plug-in hybrids, 5 of them caught fire. They were just sitting in their driveways, some were on the charger, some were off, and they just spontaneously caught fire and burst into flame. So that's 5 out of 27,000, and they're not sure why that happened. And so they've stopped selling them, and there's a huge recall on them. And my wife and I have a little bit of a dilemma now, because the problem is if you take your Pacifica in for inspection and they find there's a battery terminal, there's some corrosion on the battery terminal that seems to be linked to the catching of fire. And if they find any corrosion on that battery terminal, they just literally take the van away from you and give you some other car. Most often, apparently, it's a Jeep. And I've got nothing against Jeeps except they don't get 80 miles per gallon. I really love driving a car that's using almost no gas. And so if we take it in and they find it, they will take our van away from us and give us something else. This boils down to a 0.01% chance that it's going to catch fire. And, this is only the 3rd model year for this car. These are the kinds of problems that can happen when you have a brand new technology. And we were sort of prepared for that when we bought the car, but on the other hand, if your car catches fire while it's just sitting there, that's not worth risking your house for. So we're a little bit torn. We haven't actually gotten our formal recall notice yet. Supposedly it's in the mail on the way. What's your opinion? What would you advise Carol and me to do? Should we do the recall, or should we take the 0.01% risk? Give me some advice here. 866-240-1065. We are leaning towards not taking it in. We're leaning towards taking the risk and just continuing to use this fantastic van, which has not given us any signs or any problems that there's any trouble with it. But it is a little bit of a dilemma. We realize we are taking a a 0.01% risk by doing this. Are we crazy? Should we just take it in and possibly save our house and garage, or is it okay? 0.01% is not, you could worry about it, but it's not something that you should alter your life with. 866-240-1065. I'd really like your advice. And this news comes kind of timely with this interview that we're about to listen to. This interview is with Jeff Welser, as I've said, and he is a head researcher with IBM, good old International Business Machines, and they've developed a new kind of battery which would not have these problems that the current lithium-ion batteries have. And so I was very happy to be able to interview him. Russell, have we got the interview queued up? Can we go with that? Our interview with Jeff Welser. So, could you give us your name and your title, please?
Sure. My name's Jeff Welser. I'm a VP at IBM Research.
First of all, Jeff, thank you for being on For Agreed Future. Really appreciate you taking the time. And just a few questions about this new battery science that you're working on. What exactly is the science behind your heavy metal-free battery, and how would it work?
Yeah, hi. Thanks very much for having me. I'm happy to come talk about this. Yeah, so we've been doing work on energy storage and batteries for quite a while. It's kind of an extension of the science technology work we do in general at IBM. Specifically focused on things that we think can help the IT infrastructure, but also things that might help the grid or driverless cars, electric cars in the future. And one of the things, of course, we're always looking for, in particular for battery technology, are how can you make things higher power, faster charging, safer, and more sustainable? And a lot of that has to do with changing materials, and that's really what we specialize in. And one of the things about materials and batteries are there are a lot of heavy metals in them, and these are metals that are not necessarily good for the environment. They oftentimes also are mined in conditions that may be exploitive, so we're always aware of that as well. And we came up with a chemistry that can avoid these heavy metals, and yet still have a lot of the properties we look for in a battery. And specifically, the metals we're avoiding now is cobalt and nickel, which are heavy metals that definitely have been problematic in the past.
So what sort of chemicals does your battery use? Exactly how does it work? I see you avoiding cobalt and nickel. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
So what are you doing instead?
So instead, we came up with a different form of a cathode material, which is iodine-based. So it's an iodine salt that's used instead for the cathode. It still uses lithium ions and some of the other chemistries that are similar with other batteries, but it was able to eliminate those heavy metals. And basically, we found reactions that could be used with the iodine, which give us a lot of the same properties that we need in a battery. And in fact, in some cases, improve properties of the battery, but don't have to involve a heavy metal in the process. So since iodine itself can come from many sources, including literally being distilled from seawater or brine, it's much more sustainable, we believe. And of course, then also it has fewer risks than what the heavy metals did.
Well, that's great. All right, so what was the initial inspiration behind IBM pursuing this kind of a solution?
Right, so this is all part of the work we've been doing overall, not just for the electronics side, but also for sort of what we call our impact science. So this is science we do that we believe will actually have an impact, a positive impact on society or big problems. We work on things like the future of climate being one area that we think about. So things that can be sustainable, things that can be somehow be more useful in terms of technology, but also have less impact on the planet are things we're always looking for. For example, we've also been looking at various polymer technologies, originally for semiconductor use, but along the way we found that some polymers that could be much more recyclable, for example, for replacing PET plastics. So whenever we find things along these lines, we always try and pursue them if at all possible, because we'd like to have both good technology as well as technology that's good for the world.
You touched on this a little bit, but what problems does this project attempt to solve for battery technology, and how does the performance of this battery compare to the current lithium-ion batteries?
Yeah, that's what's really exciting, at least to me, about it, is that the fact that we got the heavy metals out is fantastic from a sustainability point of view, but it turns out that by changing the chemistry up, there actually were other advantages that we hadn't necessarily realized, and so we started doing the research. First of all, we think it's going to be lower cost because the cobalt, nickel, and other heavy metals are actually fairly high cost. It looks like right now, too, it's actually faster charging. So in less than 5 minutes, we might be able to get it charged up to 80% of of its storage capacity. And, particularly for, say, the automotive application area, that's really important. You don't want to be sitting around your charger for half an hour when you're on a long road trip. It also can hold very high power density. That's important, of course, for range, and that's one of the major advantages of standard lithium-ion batteries today, is that they have very high power density and energy density that they can store. However, it's also less dangerous. It's got lower flammability than lithium-ion. That's one of the concerns of the standard lithium-ion batteries, is that chemistry, unfortunately, can sometimes have metal dendrites and things that cause shorts, which can actually cause fires and other problems. And it also appears to be very energy efficient. More than 90% efficiency we're seeing right now in terms of the amount of energy we can put in and discharge, and what the losses might be along the way.
Oh, that's pretty exciting. So what are the implications from the environmental standpoint? And you realistically think you can eliminate heavy metals from battery technology?
Yeah, right now it does appear so. And obviously, to be clear, this is still in a research lab, so we've done very small prototypes, and so we're actually working, obviously, to advance this and see if you could do it, at a scale that would actually make sense. But at least from what we can see right now, yeah, we could eliminate those heavy metals, which is great. In terms of where we get the iodine from, it would be ideal if we could find a way to really efficiently take it directly from seawater at the quantities you'd want, but there may be other mechanisms for doing it too. But in general, it seems like it's going the right direction for what we want for sustainability.
Do you see this having potential to help us transition over to wind and solar power?
Absolutely. I mentioned the car application in particular because that's one I think it's on everyone's mind these days. But we all know if we're really going to use a lot of these renewable sources, which are of course on or off, right? So solar only is on in the sunshine or in the daytime, and wind is only when the wind's blowing. We need to have really good, efficient storage technology to store that extra power when we can produce it, and then of course release it back out to the grid or to individual homes along the way. And batteries is one really efficient way to do it, but they've been very expensive. You have to find ways to scale them up to really high energy densities to be able to make this really make sense.
What was the coolest thing that you folks discovered in terms of pure science and the research that led to the development of the battery?
Yeah, I think that the science behind the way that the chemistry ended up working, that it actually allowed for this much higher, faster charging and higher energy densities, was really surprising to us, because we weren't necessarily thinking that was what we were heading for the first time. We were just trying to thought if we can get as good enough without having heavy metals, that might be worthwhile. But actually finding the science worked in our favor once we actually went through the chemistry, I think that was what excited all of us the most, because then the trade-off is not as big. You aren't saying, I'm doing this because it's a good for me battery. It's, no, this actually is a really good battery, and it also happens to be good for the planet.
Yeah, that is pretty exciting. I have a hybrid, plug-in hybrid, Chrysler Pacifica, and yeah, the 2-hour charge on the fast charger, it is kind of inconvenient to be able to charge in 5 minutes. That's almost can't imagine it. That's fantastic. What plans do you guys have for furthering this technology?
Yeah, so right now that's exactly what we want to do. Obviously, IBM is not in the battery business. We came across this technology. We think it's really important that we develop it further. But this is where we go through partnerships. So we announced that we already are working with Mercedes-Benz Research. Obviously, Mercedes-Benz is very interested in battery technology for very clear reasons for the automotive area. But we're also then working with Central Glass, which is one of the world's top battery electrolyte suppliers. So obviously that gets into what we would actually do for producing this electrolyte and this chemistry at larger scales. And then Cytus, which is one of the top battery manufacturers. So through these partnerships, we hope to first of all prove out will this technology really work at a scale that makes sense. And then of course those would be the routes to actually take this out into a larger scale market.
So the dendrites that normally form in lithium-ion batteries that kind of stick crystals that kind of stick themselves across the battery and sort of short it out, they don't like this electrolyte that you're using.
That's right, exactly. So they rely on some of the catalyst effects of the heavy metals to actually form some of these oxides and dendrites that go across. So it appears, at least at this point, that they really can't form those nearly as readily in this iodine-based environment. So was a really nice positive on this that again wasn't necessarily something we'd expected at the time.
Lithium-ion batteries theoretically are recyclable, and to some degree they're being recycled, but how easily do you think your battery will be to recycle?
It will be as easy or easier than the lithium-ion ones, because you still have all the things that that go into the battery. Obviously, lithium itself is in there and things like that. But at least we removed the heavy metals. So those were two things you always had to be really careful to pull out separately because you didn't want those contaminating. So at least there are a couple items you now pulled out that you don't have to worry about, that you don't have to recycle separately. And of course, the iodine salts themselves, as I said, tend to go into just seawater, so it's much easier to recycle that.
Oh, that's great. All right, so what inspired you personally to get into science?
Yeah, so when I was starting off college back in the 80s and 90s, I really was interested in computers themselves at the time. I thought I was going to be a software programmer, to be honest. But then when I got into college and started taking programming courses, I started to realize that everything I was doing was limited by what the machine itself could do. What's the actual technology, the computer chip that's inside this machine? So I started studying the computer chip itself and understanding how they were built. And ultimately that brought me down to understanding that everything we built on the computer chip was limited by our understanding of physics and materials. How could we make the materials and devices do what we wanted them to do? That's why I really got excited about the materials and physics space. So after that, I went on to grad school. I was totally focused on semiconductor materials and devices in particular. That's the area that I was focused on when I was doing research. And the idea of being able to manipulate materials and manipulate the science to do different types of information processing in that case really got me excited. And then when I joined IBM Research, of course, we do a lot of that kind of research. That really is the main focus of all of our science and technology work, is improving what we can do for computational, IT infrastructure, very broadly for the enterprise. But that introduced me then into people working with polymers and chemicals and all sorts of other materials that I'd never really got to study. So it's been a great opportunity for me to also learn, at least vicariously, about a lot of other science that's going on.
That is cool. Yeah, I remember the atomic microscopes that allowed the researchers to take individual atoms and line them up to spell out IBM.
That was actually in the lab. So I managed the San Jose Almaden lab out in San Jose, California for IBM, and that was the lab where that was done before I was running the lab, of course. But that was really exciting. We still have those machines in the basement, and they're still manipulating atoms, one by one, moving them around to understand, how we can really push the limits of matter. It was just a year or two ago that we showed you can actually store a bit of information on an individual atom, which is, pretty much the limit in terms of how small you're going to go. So obviously, it means that there's a lot of room still to continue to improve our storage technologies. But I do think that's what's really exciting about science, is seeing, how far you can push our understanding of it, and then how you can actually apply it into things that would be useful in the future.
Any parting thought?
Yeah, I would say I think one of the things that I think is really important for people is when they're doing research in whatever area they go after, always keeping your eyes open for what other applications you weren't thinking of that maybe what you're discovering might be helpful for. Obviously we did not set out to discover batteries initially, right? We were looking at ways of manipulating materials and then started to think about how they could be used for batteries, and then over time started to create a program that said, hey, we think we have some really interesting technology here we can go after. And that's one of the joys, I think, of doing research, is that, making sure you don't just go after the problem you thought you were solving, but always thinking about what other problems are out there that one could try to solve.
All right. Well, that's a great thought to leave us on. All right, Jeff Welser, thank you very much for being on For a Green Future.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Okay, so there's our interview, and we're very happy to have heard from Jeff Welser. Yeah, I think that technology properly aimed and properly utilized, is part of the answer of getting us out of our current crises. I know technology got us into these crises, but I think it was the fact that we started ignoring the science and started ignoring scientists who were raising the alarms about things like carbon 20, 30, 40 years ago. It's when we turn our back on science and when we turn our back on technology that we actually get into the big trouble. And knowledge is power, and the knowledge that we have technologies, we have ways to do things properly, to do things in a green way, in a way that won't destroy the environment, and yet we can still meet all our needs. That is one of the main messages of our show, For a Green Future. What did you think of Jeff Welser? Would you buy one of these new batteries? Or what if you could buy an electric car that you could charge in 10 minutes and would have twice the range of the current electric cars and be cheaper than the current electric cars, because the battery technology is one of the most expensive part of an electronic car. If those battery prices come down because now the batteries are made more cheaply, let's say you have an electric car that's cheaper than the gas version, goes farther, can accelerate faster, because that's one cool thing about electric cars is that they can accelerate like crazy, and is cheaper and goes farther and charges up in 5 to 10 minutes. Then would you leave your F-150 and go into the electric car business, or do you have to feel that rumble? Do you have to feel those vibrations coursing through you as you barrel along with a hole in your muffler and wake the whole neighborhood? Which side are you on? Are you driving a gas car just because it's the only practical car right now? And if there were practical electric cars, would you jump on that bandwagon? Or are you just like, it's got to be carbon, and it's got to be internal combustion, or it's not really a car? Let us know, 866-240-1065. And I want to talk about something that Jeff Welser just touched on briefly. Just want to expand on that a little bit, and that is cobalt. And cobalt mining, in some places it's being done all right, like in Australia, but a lot of the world's cobalt comes from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and there it is literally mined by hand. People are literally just digging holes in the ground. These are tunnels that are dug with shovels, and they're unsupported. There's no bracing. There's no regulation at all. It's completely unregulated. And worst of all, the cobalt is being mined by children as young as 3 to 11, 12, 13. That's the range of children that work in these mines. The cobalt that's in the lithium battery that's in your cell phone may well have been originally picked out of muddy slurry by hand by a little 8-year-old girl in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And this is a terrible thing. And some are arguing, well, we can't just take cobalt mining away because Democratic Republic of Congo has almost no industry, and so this child industry is terrible, but at least it's something. And that is a false argument, because part of what's happening is these mines, these unregulated mines, are contaminating the environment around them. Cobalt is often found with uranium, and so there's radioactive slurry coming out of these mines and contaminating the local rivers and the local ecosystems. And so with every pound of cobalt that they mine, they are making the Democratic Republic of Congo less habitable. And so the economic argument falls down. Even if you completely ignore the moral argument, which is on its own, that should be enough to stop this practice. We should not be buying cobalt from the Democratic Republic of Congo as long as it's mined by children. And if you go to a place where there's child labor, they inevitably say, oh, we have to have our children work because there's no jobs for the adults here. And of course the answer to that is the reason there's no job for the adults is that the children are doing the work. And the estimates are it's about 30,000 children employed, quote unquote, employed in the cobalt industry of the Democratic Republic of Congo. So if we could skip that whole element, if we can get that whole thing out of the process altogether, that will take us a long way towards getting a green future. And if you like having a green present, then I would suggest you patronize one of our advertisers. And that advertiser is the Wood County Park District. The Wood County Park District is a natural resources conservation agency. They protect natural spaces, maintain quality green spaces, provide engaging programming, and they teach people to love and respect nature. They restore wildlife habitats, and they lead outdoor adventures. Wood County Parks protects 20 natural spaces in Wood County for all to enjoy from 8 a.m. to 30 minutes past sunset every day of the year. And there's several ways you could reach them. One is by phone. You can call them at 419-353-1897. That's 419-353-1897. Another is their website, which is just wcparks.org. And, of course, they have a nifty app. You just go to the App Store and look for WC Parks. And there you can find what they're doing, links to activities, and you can see pictures that people have posted of things that have happened at the Wood County Parks. It's a very nice app. And I just want to make a comment I saw on Facebook in the Bowling Green Facebook page, Bowling Green Raw. It's called, someone was complaining about mosquitoes on the Slippery Elm Trail. Well, I went on the Slippery Elm Trail just last night, and I did not get eaten by mosquitoes. But I do have some advice for people that have trouble with mosquitoes, because what you eat can affect how much the mosquitoes like you. In other words, the sweeter your diet, the more sugar you've got in your bloodstream, the more the mosquitoes are like, hey, this person's been eating donuts. Wow, they taste great. So, one, go easy on the sugar before you go out in the wild. But two, this is just my own personal recommendation, and I'm not a doctor or anything like that. But in my personal experience, garlic oil tablets, garlic oil pills are actually very effective at keeping away mosquitoes. One thing that I do before I go on a walk where I think there's going to be mosquitoes is I take a garlic oil pill about 15 minutes before, and then it seems to be about 2 hours that the mosquitoes will just stay away. They just won't bite you. And my family, we had a very clear demonstration of this once. We went to a marsh, and there was a boardwalk on the marsh, and this family came running out of the boardwalk as we were heading in, and they were followed by a dark cloud of mosquitoes. You could see them. There were thousands of them, and they were yelled at us as they went by. They said, "Don't go in there, you'll be eaten alive." But we had taken our garlic, and we just walked into the marsh, and we had no trouble. The mosquitoes did not bother us. Apparently, the selenium that's in garlic is something that mosquitoes don't like. It's not good for their developing eggs. So if you've got a lot of garlic in your system, then the mosquitoes will tend to leave you alone. We have a caller. It's a caller we're very familiar with. Rebecca, are you on the line?
Howdy, to quote Cousin Minnie Pearl.
Well, welcome, Rebecca. I sorry I wasn't able to have you as a full-fledged co-host this episode, but I'm glad you called in.
Well, that's the way Mop Flop. I want to add up that just like you do your tuxedo thing. I'm wearing a big ruffly dress and a with puffy sleeves and a petticoat and a straw hat with a price tag still on it.
Well, golly, that just sounds lovely. So
thank you. Actually, I love Cousin Minnie Pearl. I think she's so funny. She's a genius. She really is.
Mm-hmm. So
she was like,
go ahead.
We're upsetting the dog. He heard me. He thinks I'm inviting people over, or maybe bears.
Too much laughing for Koga's taste.
Yeah. We might invite bears to the apartment any time now, and with disastrous consequences.
Yeah, so were you able to hear any of our interview there, or what we've been talking about so far on the show?
Here's one thing. Understand maybe not so much. I have a lot of basic terms which I have to look up now, which I'm realizing I didn't absorb as much grade school science as I thought I did.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for example, okay, I thought electrolytes were why you have to take Pedialyte when you have the flu.
That's true.
Apparently,
in human beings.
They're in the batteries too. Does it keep them from getting the flu?
It keeps them healthy.
Good.
What the electrolyte is in a battery is the fluid that's between the plates, the fluid that's between the two parts of the battery that are actually exchanging the electrons. So like, whenever you have two metals, you can make a battery out of them. But the electrons have to have a way to go from one to the other, and the electrolyte is the fluid in between there that allows that whole reaction cycle to take place.
So they do need fluids just like people, but I don't know if they have like salt and sugar in it and stuff like the stuff you're supposed to drink when your fluids are not okay.
No, they use very different. I mean, I think they are salts, but they're very different salts. As you heard, lots of nickel and cobalt in the current ones, and that if we had those in our bloodstream, we'd be dead. So
pretty much,
so
yeah.
We can't use the same electrolytes. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, now I forget what I was going to say, but yeah, he said something about using brine or salt water to make them, which, confuses things too. But I think he meant you take the salt out or something. I'm not sure.
Well, what he was talking about was taking the iodine that's floating around in the seawater and extracting that to make the electrolyte that they've created. So there's lots of iodine in the ocean.
Yeah,
so,
I feel like changing batteries is a good thing, maybe partly because, stop me if you've heard this one before, but I actually had an uncle who died because he was melting down batteries to sell their component metals, one of which is lead.
It's been a while. I keep going on this story.
Yeah. So, Uncle Jerry was really not okay ever, or he had trouble holding down a job after the Korean War. So, he was doing that to make a little side cash, and everybody noticed that he was disoriented and slurring his speech and he had tremors, but everybody thought, and it was funny because he always seemed kind of drunk, but nobody ever saw him drink that much. It's like he would always look drunk, but nobody would see him having more than a beer or two. And then when they went into his trailer after he passed away, because he forgot to take his blood pressure meds and stroked out. Another symptom of lead poisoning being mental confusion and forgetfulness, as well as slurring, tremors. Yeah. Right. Yeah, so they found a whole bunch of...
It does cause high blood pressure.
Okay, so I think he already had that, but I think that didn't help it. So they found a whole bunch of lead under his bed. For some reason he was storing it there. I don't know, it's one of those things I don't know if you've read any Farley Mowat. He's a great Canadian naturalist and author, and he had this thing about this dog that I think his pet owl used to tempt into running full speed into a wall by just sort of parking above the wall and looking down on it, because once you run full speed into a wall once, you lose the mechanism which tells you that's a bad idea. So it might have been like that, Yeah, so Is lead actually a heavy metal, or is it something else?
Yeah, it's a heavy metal. Mm-hmm.
Okay,
all
right.
Farley Mowat, he wrote Never Cry Wolf, which is a fantastic book.
He wrote.
Yeah.
That's kind of semi-serious with some humor in it, but my mom read me a lot of his books when I was a kid. So a lot of them are for children, and some of them are really pretty seriously funny.
Oh, okay. Good. I'll look up. I didn't even know he'd had some humorous writing. I'll check that out.
Well, in
sorry about Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. There's some humor in Never Cry Wolf too, I think.
Yeah, there's some good moments. Yeah, I'm sorry about your uncle. That's a terrible story.
Yeah, it's pretty sad, and less batteries always good. Less lead batteries.
Right. The more we can get lead out of our ecosystems and out of our economy, the better. So,
in a lot of ways, I feel like all Midwesterners have kind of the two generations before us have all kind of been sacrificed to the great dragon of industrialism, because so many people have suffered in various ways because of the industrial jobs they had to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it looks like they're going to try to sacrifice more of us this upcoming next couple of months here, and that's not a good thing.
Yeah, they're very sacrificey.
Yeah. All right. Well, Rebecca, thanks very much for calling in.
You're welcome. Good to talk to you.
Good talking to you.
Bye-bye.
We'll talk next week, if not sooner. Okay. All right. Well, that was Rebecca, and she just called in at 866-240-1065. That's 866-240-1065. Do you have a cautionary tale like Rebecca? Have you lost a relative to some nasty industrial chemical? I'd like to hear about that. Also, I'm still looking for advice on what to do about our recall on our van. Do we take it in? Do we not? I don't know. Let me know what you think. Maybe you're kind of like, oh no, Joe, don't take your van in. Just keep driving it. You'll be fine. I don't know. Let me know. Okay, so now we are on to our Eco News segment. And as promised, here comes some shocking Eco News. It may be that Chernobyl 2 is underway in Russia. There has been measurements taken in 3 different countries, in Finland, Norway, and Sweden, and they have all found raised levels of radioactive isotopes are being deposited on their countries. And the Swedish and the Norwegian, they've analyzed the direction that these radioactive isotopes are coming from and the kind of radioactive isotopes. And and Denmark at least has reached the conclusion that these are coming from a damaged fuel core in a nuclear power plant, and which means that very likely, to some degree, there's some melting down going on in the nuclear power plants in Russia. And if you remember Fukushima 10 years ago, or if you remember Chernobyl before that, both of those, there were complete denials by the nuclear industry, by the countries involved, that anything bad was going on. The constant news was everything's under control. And as you'll recall with Fukushima, they kept saying that right up to the point where Fukushima exploded. And so that's what Russia's saying again. That's what Russia is saying is that there's no increase in radiation, all the plants are running normally. Nothing to see here, folks, move on. But this is what the nuclear industry and what governments running nuclear power plants always say. Even in the worst possible nuclear disasters, they maintain the lie as long as possible that there's no problem, nothing's wrong, no danger to the general public. And in fact, this story, which I've gleaned off of AP, has this story, and it was just came out yesterday out of Helsinki. Once again, the writing in this story over and over again stresses that the radioactive isotopes are harmless. They're saying harmless levels of radiation, harmless isotopes, and that is a lie. There is no such thing as a harmless radioactive isotope. Any kind of isotope that gets into your body and emits radiation is going to cause damage. And it's pretty much a straight line dose. So a little tiny bit of radiation is going to cause a little tiny bit of damage and cause a few cancers. And lots of radiation is going to cause lots of damage and lots of cancers if it doesn't kill you outright. I mean, high enough radiation levels and the radiation itself will kill you. But this idea that these are harmless levels, no. Just because they might be below some artificial level set by some agency somewhere, like the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is heavily influenced by the atomic energy industry, just because they're below these arbitrary levels they've set doesn't mean that they're harmless. It just means that some bureaucrats somewhere have decided that they're willing to accept a level of damage to you and your family and to the human genome to justify nuclear power. And so these denials that are coming out of TASS, the Russian news agency TASS, they sound eerily similar to the denials that happened as Chernobyl was going on. And if you ever watched the HBO special on Chernobyl, you know that the main thing that the government of the Soviet Union at the time was trying to do was cover this up, was to prevent it from getting out. Unfortunately, there's no way to prevent the radioactive isotopes from getting out. And there's no way to argue with reality. I mean, if these countries are measuring increased radioactivity, and these are isotopes which do not normally occur in nature. There's a whole bunch of, nuclear power plants produce over 200 radioactive isotopes, and a lot of them do not exist in nature because their half-lives are so short that any ones that were produced naturally when the Earth was formed or when the solar system was forming, they've all gone away. Their half-lives have been exceeded, and they've literally evaporated. These radioactive isotopes that we create, the artificial ones, they're unmistakable. You can't just say, "Oh, look, there's a radioactive rubidium." It must have come from outer space or something. No, these are man-made. So there is some sort of accident going on in Russia right now. We don't know the severity yet because Russia's lying about it, and we're just going to have to wait and see. And as I say, this might be headline news in the next week. If this accident which has happened is continuing and spirals out of control, we're going to see yet another Chernobyl, which is right on schedule because nuclear meltdowns happen about once every 10 years. Fukushima, the 10th anniversary is coming up in March, and so this is right on schedule for the next nuclear plant meltdown. And so that's the shocking news. All right, so let's move on. I want to do some upbeat news or some positive news. One is that we're continuing to watch the CO2 levels at Mauna Loa, at the measuring place in Hawaii there measures CO2 levels. And you'll be happy to know that CO2 levels are coming down as they usually do according to the seasonal variations. So the numbers are still way too high, of course, but CO2 levels are dropping as here in the Northern Hemisphere as plants grow and as the Tiaga grows. And there was some fear that levels would keep going up even though this is the season for them to drop, in which case basically we'd be done. There'd be no stopping the positive feedback loop, but the CO2 levels are going down. So once again, nature gives us another opportunity to reduce the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, and we've got to seize that opportunity or we will be done. It's a question of crashing into a wall at 65 miles an hour or 100 miles an hour. Either way, you don't have to crash into the wall. Just put on the brakes. Just buy those, don't put gas in your car, use public transportation, et cetera, et cetera. All right, one more interesting little piece of news that I wanted to get to before we get to our letter from the future. Trump has nominated a fella to be deputy administrator of the EPA, and he is a typical Trump appointee. His name is Douglas Benevenetto, and he, of course, was a lobbyist for the fracking industry. That's his qualification to be deputy administrator of the EPA. And he also worked for an energy, gas and electric company called Xcel, and he went directly from his job at Xcel into the Trump administration, and that's why Trump has submitted him to be deputy director of the Environmental Protection Agency, because he does not like the environment, and so he likes to nominate people that are bent on destroying the environment. Well, this looked like just another routine Trump appointing somebody who's going to help wreck the planet, because that's what he does. But this time, a Republican said, no way. And this is her Republican. Her name is Joni Ernst, and she's a senator. And she says she was motivated by the fact that Douglas Benevenetto has a history of being down on ethanol, on being down on biofuels, and her constituents are largely dependent on the biofuel market, and so she didn't want to support a guy who was going to wipe out her constituents. But what it is, it shows the first crack in the Republican wall. This is the first time I know of that a Republican, that one of Trump's appointees has actually been blocked, and he was actually blocked by a Republican. And so I think what's happening is that the Republicans are looking at the numbers, they're looking at the polls, they're looking at what people are saying, and they realize that even their constituents, Republicans, care about the environment, that they care about saving the planet, and they have actually finally stood up to Trump on something. And the chair of the committee that was necessary to approve Douglas Benevenento has said that he will not even be considered. This is a long way. This would be not doing something bad. Okay, so I have to give the Republicans credit for this. They are not putting in place somebody who would be actively bad for the environment. They still have a long way to go before they actually do something good. It's one thing to get credit for not doing something bad. It's a whole other thing to actually do something that helps the environment. And as we saw here in Ohio with HB 104, the Republicans and many of the Democrats are still hell-bent on putting in place policies that hurt the environment. And if they don't do HB 104, which is that ridiculous, we've talked about it before, nuclear power bill that would push nuclear power in Ohio and turn Ohio into a radioactive waste dump. If they don't do HB 104, they get some credit, but that's still a long way from restoring the cuts to wind and solar that they did last year in HB 6. And it doesn't in any way affect what's happened. The other things HB 6 did, which was give direct subsidies to nuclear and coal plants out of our electric bills, just saddling us with nuclear and coal for the next many, many years. So I, as promised, I actually called my Republican state senator, Teresa Gavarone, about this. And we had a nice long conversation. She said, I don't know. She didn't know about the bill and didn't make any kind of commitments one way or the other. And I think she forgot that at one time I was running for Bowling Green City Council, and I was on a debate stage with her, and she literally answered every single question in the debate with, I don't know, I'm going to get more information, and I'll get back to you on that. She never answered a single debate question, and then she went on to win the election. So that's what she did in the phone call with me. She played ignorant, said, I don't know. It would be easier to believe had she not been such a vociferous advocate for HB 6 because of the nuclear power industry. We're just going to have to wait and see, but hopefully she'll at least be able to get credit for not doing something bad. Hopefully she'll be able to help kill HB 104 and prevent Ohio from becoming a nuclear waste dump. I don't see any credit for doing anything good yet. She still hasn't helped the wind industry or the solar industry. But maybe at least the Republicans are slowing down. Maybe at least they're realizing just how much the anti-environmental stance that they're taking under Trump is actually hurting them electorally. At least they're going to slow down and do less bad. So, all right. So there's some good news. And now, as we know, all of this is going to work out at some point, and we're going to have a green future. And we know this because my great-great-granddaughter Marie I once again sent me a letter from the year 2300 talking about her green future. Okay, and here it is. Dear great-great-grandpa, well, after a week of hiking, I'm sorry to say I've only made it to North Baltimore. This is where the trail ended back in your day. Now I'm ready to set out on the new section going all the way down to Cincinnati. It's incredibly frustrating. In the past, I could have jogged this distance in one day. Now I feel like an old woman plodding along, step after step, having to stop at every park bench. As I go along, though, I'm in constant contact with Michael. He's awake most of the day now. He hasn't said anything yet, but the doctors are saying they're going to try to start getting him to sit up and do some rehab work next week. One thing did happen that I wanted to share with you. Just north of North Baltimore, in the evening, I was sitting alone on a bench, watching the setting sun, when a big old raccoon clambered up onto the bench and sat down right beside me. Turns out the locals call him Old Ben, and he's known for being incredibly friendly. I started talking to him, and before I knew it, all the troubles of the past year just poured out of me, and I was telling this raccoon all my problems. When I finished, it actually reached out and put a paw on my knee, then lumbered off into the brush. I know we're not supposed to, but I felt so grateful to that animal that I left half a protein bar on the bench. That night I slept better than I have since the accident. Thanks to you for listening too, Great-Great-Grandpa. Love, Marie I. All right, and thanks to all of you for listening. This is the best hour of my week when I get to talk to you folks. And please don't hesitate to contact us with any kind of comments on the show. You can email me at joe@joedemare4agreenfuture.org. You can also call or text me at 419-973-5841. And also, if you have a business, think about becoming an advertiser or becoming a patron. Go to patreon.com and just look for a Green Future, and you can sign up there to help bring the Green Future about. So I just want to say thank you very much. This is Joe DeMare signing off.
Radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No,